Welcome to the review of the one classic that changed my life forever. Hey everyone, welcome to Pen to Paper. I'm Leah, and today I'm extremely excited to review this masterpiece for you. And this masterpiece that I'm talking about today is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Before I ever picked this up, I don't think I've read Russian literature in its entirety and form. I've read snippets here and there, and I just knew that War and Peace was a classic that I was hearing over and over again, and I just had to read it. Now, in this review, I'm going to share some challenges that I faced, although they weren't that many, all the wonderful aspects of this book and how it changed my life. And I'll also be sharing some of the main characters so that you can keep an eye on them as you go on your reading journey through this book. And I will even give you a little cheat at the end. So stay tuned for that. Let's get into the review. Okay, so probably looking at the size of this book, you can see it's already a challenge this way. I did not go around looking for a specific translation to read. I just so happened to have the New American Translation. The cover is not even that great. I don't even get the significance of this tree in rainbow. It's kind of a weird color. Anyways, and this is the one I had, so this is the one I picked up and read. The only thing with this translation, as you can see, it's very chunky. It comes in at 1,500 pages, and the writing is incredibly tiny. So if you don't do well with small writing, this is not a good translation to use or form of this translation. I have heard of people getting the book separated into 3 different hardcovers, or maybe paperbacks as well. I don't know what that is. So if you're more picky about translation and the way that it looks to help you digest the story in a better way, then go ahead and do your research. But this is what I had, so I just stuck with it. Now, the one challenging part that I felt, I don't really know what it's attributed to exactly, but I had a hard time between pages 850 to 1,000. And the reason, there's 2 possible reasons for that. One is I remember that section of the book being heavily focused on the war front, because this book takes place between 1805 to 1820, which is the Napoleonic Wars. So Napoleon was waging war against the Emperor Alexander of Russia. And it does go back and forth between the families on the home front and then the sons who go off to war and the war front. So I don't know if it's because of that, and it just was a longer section on the war front, and it's not, although it was very interesting in many different parts, those parts were not the main parts that grabbed my attention as much as they did on the home front. But it could very well be that while I was reading that section, I was going to bed quite a bit later, and the only times I get to read are before bedtime, so an hour or 2 before bed. And it could be that because I was pushing my bedtime later, I was just having a hard time staying up and being awake and not falling asleep. So for me, it just felt like a drag. But I pushed through those 150 pages, and I'm so glad I did, because there was so much more in store for me to discover, to fall in love with, to be moved by. Now you may ask, what is this book about? Why is it 1,500 pages of words? What does it talk about? Well, this book is about life. Life in its entirety of emotions that you go through. It talks about love and loss and lust and regrets and death and birth and the meaning of life and purpose of life and inner struggles. Everyone can relate to this book. All the characters and their dialogues were pieces of life that I could just cut out of the book and insert into my own, and I would be able to recognize who in my life would say such a phrase as this, or who in my life would respond this way, or how would they react to this situation. So it's incredibly relatable. Not only that, the writing, Leo Tolstoy's writing, it's not incredibly flowery prose, although it has its moment where it really touches the heart. And it's not complicated. It's straight to the point, but not simple. So that's the genius of his writing, is that even if you're not a huge classics lover, or maybe you're just starting to get into classics, it's easy to read. It's not difficult to understand. And now my kids are up still at this time. Anyways, back to the writing. So one of my favorite portions of this book, and it actually brought me to tears, was literally a third of the page long. Was that a half? A third. Anyways, a third to a half a page long, and it was mostly dialogue, and yet it was so stirring. And these two characters' journeys reunited in such a beautiful way. It moved me to tears. I was crying. And for me to cry in any story, it's incredibly difficult to get me to cry. And yet I was sobbing and just so moved. So any book that does that to me just hits the mark. I don't think I even said what the rating was I gave this. I gave this 5 stars, no questions asked. So a little bit more about the book. I said that it goes between the families on the home front and the war front. So it starts off with the families on the home front. Also, the genius of his writing is because it draws the reader in, not through action and not through tropes and not through specific plotting. It draws you in because it's so real, and because there's an authenticity to it that is so difficult to find even in modern day literature. The first 75 pages of this book was set at a ball one night. 75 pages. And it's giving you the layout of these families and their relations with one another and how they interacted. And it was never boring at any single point. Instead, it was intriguing, and I just wanted to know more. And that's also the genius behind Tolstoy's writing, is his characters are so well developed. Even though there's so many different names to keep track of, it actually wasn't that difficult for me, because each character was his or her own distinct nature and personality, and the way that they were matched up with what they said and how they reacted and responded. So everything fits together just perfectly to create this masterpiece. The war front. So after the home front, we go to the war front. And even there, even though I don't know military maneuvers, and I didn't even brush up on the history of the Napoleonic War, so this actually taught me a lot as I was reading it. Even here, that he retained the humanity of the soldiers on the war front. There was this scene where he's talking about how the soldiers and battalions are moving along in a line, and things are getting ready for war. And there's this man who says, "We're going to flatten them like a pancake." And it was just such this weird, odd, funny, humorous sentence to throw into. It just made me laugh. You know, I guess in a setting that would be the least likely to make me laugh. But it did, because it was just so human and real. So that's what you find throughout his writing. That's the genius of his writing. All right, now let's get into, and I do want to mention there's actually quite a bit of French in this book. So if you don't know French or are not able to understand French, then maybe look for a translation that explains the French at the bottom. The reason why there's quite a bit of French is, well, before Napoleon comes to Moscow and takes it over, the French and the Russians, well, it was just very fashionable to speak French, and there was a lot of French influence in the Russian culture at the time. So that's why they spoke a lot of French. But then when you get to that point in the book where Napoleon comes and takes over Moscow and the Russian army retreats to allow Napoleon and his army to suffer at the hands of the Russian winter, there's less and less French in the book, because obviously it's not fashionable anymore. It's not fashionable to be speaking the language of your enemy, obviously. So that's what that's an interesting find you'll find in there. What else? Tolstoy really enjoys spouting his own personal opinions throughout the book, especially when it comes to philosophy and history, those two specifically. So it's interesting when he just kind of inserts himself and makes his point about his beliefs on those two things, and then he kind of picks himself up and goes back to the characters. However, it doesn't feel so out of place because he always brings it up at a time when it's relatable to the subject at hand, or when a character's about to make a certain decision and he's just expounding on why that choice, or why that character believes what they believe, or their search for meaning, and then he brings that into a little bit of an essay-like. So if you enjoy a little bit of like breaking the fourth wall with the author and the reader, then that's fun too. All right, now I think I've said a lot about the book itself. I do want to share some of the main characters with you, characters that you can keep an eye out for yourself. I'm just going to explain them very, just basically. I'm not going to give any spoilers. So although it may sound like I'm saying a lot, this is stuff that you find out definitely within the first third of the book. And that's another great thing about this book too, is there's so much journey in all of the characters' lives, or most of the characters' lives. And another thing too is every single struggle that could be highlighted in literature is found in this book. So there's man against nature, which is, I already mentioned, when Napoleon goes to Moscow and he has to fortify his army and his prisoners of war against the winter, and they ultimately fail, and then they leave Moscow and the Russian army comes back and takes Moscow. That's not a spoiler, okay? Like, just go and look at your history and you'll find out. So that's one struggle. Then we have internal struggles, which there's a lot of in this book for good reason. And then you have man against man. And actually, there's very soon in the beginning, there's a duel, and that has consequences. So there's many other aspects of man against man that you'll find in this book. There's pretty much everything. I don't think this book doesn't have, anyways, like, it has everything basically. So, and that's why I'm saying it's realistic, it's real life, and that's why it's such a gem. Okay, the characters. So we have our first character. His name is Pierre Bezukhov, and when you first meet him, he is large, oafish. He doesn't know how to act accordingly to proper society. So when he comes in, he maybe spouts opinions that no one wants to listen to, and he just doesn't maybe pick up all the social cues around him going on. So he's surrounded by people who are just trying to get something out of him. You'll see why in a minute. And or they just don't want him around and they kind of shuffle him off. So, but Pierre is one of the characters that goes through definitely the most changes in his life of the book, and definitely wrestles with, what is my purpose in life? That's mainly what his journey is. Then we have, so the family that I guess preys upon him the most and takes the most from him is Prince Vasily. So Pierre, at the beginning, He is the bastard son of his father. When his father passes, his father leaves him everything, and now Pierre is now count. Prince Vasily, I believe, was family that was, looking forward to getting something and now doesn't get anything from the previous Count Bezukhov, because now Pierre is the full heir of everything. So he takes his daughter Hélène, who is known as to be the queen of society, and he basically pushes her onto Pierre. Pierre doesn't even realize they're engaged until they're actually engaged. So it's such a strange array of events. But Hélène is all in it too, because she gets the prestige and she gets whatever she wants, and then she can have her way with whoever she wants, and obviously that causes problems. So that is Hélène. I would say that Prince Vasily, Hélène, and then her brother Anatole, they are the scoundrels of the book and cause such mayhem for all the other characters. So Anatole, he is a scoundrel. He doesn't think about anybody but himself, and because of that kind of that character has a lot of consequences, and he creates a lot of trouble for a certain couple in the book. And he does have some sort of a redemption arc at the end. However, it is not by his own hands or his own seeking for redemption, but by the grace and forgiveness of another character, which was also another moving event that I didn't expect, and yet it was so beautiful to read. Okay, so that's that for the scoundrels of the book. Then we have Prince Andrei. Now, Prince Andrei, at the beginning of the book, is married. His wife is with child, and he leaves her behind because he realizes he's not meant for home life. And if the sons of Russia are going off to war, then so be it. He will go off to war too, because he feels that he will receive honor and glory for his emperor and perhaps die on the battlefield, and that would be just fine with him. And he goes there, and because of his experiences there, his life changes. I won't say for the better or for the worse. He comes back a changed man. And then his wife, he comes back just in time for his wife to give birth to his son, but his wife passes in the process, and now he has a son, no wife. So his sister Maria steps in to be the caretaker of his son. Now Maria, she's a princess. She's one of those steadfast, loving characters that bring out the best in people. She has suffered quite a bit of verbal abuse from her father, and yet she is incredibly strong, because despite his disdain for maybe her lack of head for mathematics, or she doesn't seem that that practical to him, she still honors him with respect. He obviously doesn't deserve it by the way he's treating her, but she still respects him and loves him as her father and is incredibly forgiving toward him. And that shows a strength of character that is very, very rare, and she holds herself with such grace and mercy. So I think she was one of the characters that I looked up to the most, just for the fact. And yeah, she steps in to take care of Prince Andrei's son. Then Prince Andrei meets another character that changes his whole world upside down, and he goes through quite a bit of change too. And yet, despite meeting this character who brings joy and happiness into his life, there's such heartbreak that he has to go through. And that's all I'm going to say for there. But there's a beautiful ending to his story. So that's the Bolkonsky family. Then we have the Rostovs. Now, the main character in the Rostov family is Natasha. Natasha is this really young girl. You first meet her when she's 12, 13, and she's flouncing and dancing and singing and just has so much joy and liveliness and boisterousness. And the men are just seeing her and falling for her, and she just doesn't understand. She also goes through quite a bit of internal struggle. That's where most of her struggle comes from in the book. And she goes through quite a journey, but she goes from girl to woman, and her journey is also a beautiful thing to see in this book. Then we have her brother Nikolai. Now, at first I didn't really see Nikolai as a main male character. However, I'd say probably around the third of the book he comes in more to scene, and at first you don't really know how you feel about him. He's in love with their cousin Sonia, and Sonia's just, again, the sweetest girl, a lot like Maria. She's been there for the family their entire lives. She's desperately in love with Nikolai, and Nikolai says he loves her, but then he goes off to war. He's like, oh, well, don't stay true to me. If you find someone else, that's okay. But then it becomes an issue when the family becomes destitute of a certain person's debts, and now he, as the young man of the house, has to think about the family, and usually that requires marriage to someone who actually does have money. So I won't say what happens to him and Sonia, and you'll just have to find out for yourself. The last one I'm going to mention is, he kind of comes in later in the story. He's a prisoner of war at the end once the French have come into Moscow. And he, although his appearance is short, he makes an indelible impression upon one of our characters that changes them for the better and sets them on a completely new trajectory that gives us a beautiful end to War and Peace. So if you want to read a book that is touching, that is full of life and about life itself, this is the book that you need to read. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and I finished it back in February. It's now mid-April, and it still haunts me. I still think of it, and the characters are my friends, and it just made such an impression on me. Also, at the end, if this is something you enjoy, I guess if you don't enjoy this, then maybe just don't read this at the end. But at the end of the story, Leo Tolstoy goes into this whole essay about philosophy and history and how our fates are ultimately decided. Is it fate, or can we circumvent fate? And it's just this is kind of like his magnum opus of his thoughts on philosophy, life, and history. So that was a very interesting read to read through. If you enjoy that, then you have that little gem at the end that you can kind of indulge in. Now, perhaps maybe you're thinking, Leah, I love the sound of this book. I really can't do 1,500 pages, or I can't do the small writing. Or I just don't think I could do it. Well, there's always audiobooks if you're an audio person, but if not, if you're very, very visual, there's a cheat. And that is BBC did a War and Peace version back in 2016 with Lily James and James Norton. So that is probably one of the best adaptations I've ever seen. It took all the main parts of War and Peace and put them together so perfectly. The scene that I cried in War and Peace, I cried while watching the show. Now, I watched the show after I read, because for me, that's what I do. I like to watch things after I read them. That's kind of my rule. Maybe you do, maybe you don't have the same rule. But if you want to see an excellent adaptation of this work, then go to BBC 2016's version and you will not be disappointed. So there's my book review for War and Peace. Tell me down in the comments below, what do you think? Are you going to read it? Are you going to maybe try it as an audiobook? Or are you going to cheat? It's okay, you can tell me. I won't tell anybody else. Anyways, I will see you next week for some more pen to paper content.